We are pleased that you've been able to join us today. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Deborah Cole, the coordinator of the Master of Agribusiness program here at K-State, and we will hear from Stacy Pursell in just a moment. The MAB program is an executive distance-based program offering business training to professionals working full-time in the food, agriculture, and animal health sectors. Our animal health cohort is comprised of students who are practice managers, veterinarians, and individuals working in nutrition, feed, pharmaceuticals, vaccinology, education, and government. The program is built to facilitate earning a master's degree without career interruption, and our students participate in 2 one-week face-to-face campus sessions at the beautiful K-State Olathe campus located in the Kansas City metro area. We are currently taking applications for our 2017 cohort, which begins in August, and we would encourage you to visit www.mab.ksu.edu for more information regarding the animal health cohort at Kansas State Olathe. Some housekeeping items for the webinar. There will be some time for questions at the end, and we will open the chat feature at that time. If you have questions that arise during the webinar, we'd encourage you to tweet them with the hashtag MABWebinar, all one word. We will then enter them into the queue. We have with us today Stacy Pursell, who's an internationally respected executive search consultant and recruiter with almost 20 years of experience in the top 1% of executive recruiters worldwide. Stacy builds a world-class animal health, animal nutrition, animal science, veterinary, pet food, pet product, agribusiness, and life science industry organization. Stacy is a talent scout and workforce expert for these industries and is the founder and CEO of the VetRecruiter, a leading search firm in these industries. I turn it over to you, Stacy.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, KSU, for hosting today's webinar. It's great to be here. I'm glad all of you could join us today. All right, well, let's get started. At some point, you are probably going to find yourself in a career transition, and people work for multiple organizations throughout their career. In fact, the average person changes jobs 5 to 7 times throughout their career, and the younger generations will change their jobs more frequently than that, sometimes every 18 months to 2 years. And that is before you even factor in the current business environment in the animal health industry. And as most of you probably know, that environment includes mergers, buyouts, acquisitions, and corporate realignments. And these have been happening with more and more frequency, so much so that it has become a cause for concern among some of the professionals working within the industry. The main reason it has become a concern is that it introduces uncertainty into the lives of these professionals. As soon as the rumors start about a corporate takeover or a buyout, uncertainty starts to creep up in people's minds. And if there is one thing that people do like to be uncertain about, it is their job and their career. When the uncertainty starts to set in, then people start to ask themselves a series of questions. And these questions can include, will I have a job with this organization? Will this company even be a company anymore? Do I even want to stay with the company? Will I have the opportunity to advance if I stay within this company? Is the opportunity to advance one that I would take if I were offered it? And what is my spouse or significant other going to say about it, especially if it could involve a relocation? So when you're dealing with what appears to be an uncertain situation, there are positive steps that you can take to deal with it. And those steps include focus on what you can control and prepare for different possibilities and contingencies. Be confident in your skills and abilities, and do make a connection with a search consultant or a recruiter. Now, there can be some confusion in the minds of some professionals about how to reach out to a search consultant And there may also be some confusion about what a relationship with a search consultant should look like and what should happen during the relationship. These are some of the topics that I'll be addressing today, and it is my hope that you will find this webinar valuable and you'll be able to use it to move to the next stage of your career. Before we go any further, I would like to reference a book titled Be Hunted by Smooch Reynolds. And this is an excellent book that I believe every career professional should read if you want to truly get an insight into the search profession. In the book, the author emphasizes the fact that a search consultant or a recruiter, and I use those words interchangeably, they work for an employer and not for the candidate. First and foremost, the search consultant works to meet their clients' or the employer's needs. That means finding and recruiting the best fits for their clients' job openings. Now, that does not mean that a search consultant does not want to help candidates. They absolutely do want to help their candidates, and they want it to be a win-win for both the client and the candidate. However, their priority is to meet the needs of their client organizations who hire them. According to Hunt Scanlon Media, search consultants are part of a $10 billion a year recruiting industry. And as we'll discuss later on in today's presentation, some statistics say that more than 60% of executive level positions are filled through search consultants. And these statistics show why it's so important for you to have a relationship with the search professional throughout your career. It is truly one of the most important relationships that you can have in your career. A search consultant can help you in one of two ways. First, when the time is right, they can help you to find a better employment opportunity for yourself. And second, if you have advanced to a position of management within your employer, then they can help you to recruit talented people for your organization. Now, I'd like to address some facts and some myths about the job market. And I'll start with the facts first, and there are three main ones. More and more people are competing for fewer jobs. It is true that the economy has been growing since the Great Recession, and it's also true that many of the jobs that were lost during the Great Recession have been replaced. However, the population has also increased during that time with more people entering the workforce. Not only are more people competing for jobs, but there are also more people competing for some of the best jobs in the marketplace. And let's face it, what everybody wants is a great job and a great career, and there is much competition for these jobs and these opportunities. Second, some of the most sought-after jobs are not posted online. Not only are more people competing for these jobs, but many of these positions are also not advertised online. As a search consultant, I have filled numerous jobs over the years before they were posted online. And if jobs are not posted online, this means that you may not have access to them, and then you cannot apply for them. I think I'm one slide off here. Sorry about that. By the time that you see a job posting, that position may already be filled. When you leave yourself at the mercy of job postings, there are many variables that are out of your control. And as we discussed in point 2, some of these opportunities are not posted at all. And this is another reason why relying upon online job postings can only take you so far with your job search. Now that we've discussed the facts about the job market, let's turn to the myths. There is one big myth that I want to address, and that is job security. In today's marketplace, there is simply no such thing as job security. Does it mean if you work for a big company, then you're guaranteed that your job will be there or that your company will even be around tomorrow? We've seen that over the years with all of the consolidation. There are no guarantees that the position you have today will be there tomorrow. And even if you're happy in your position, it is in your best interest to keep your options open and be receptive to other employment opportunities. So that brings us to recruiters and the role that they fill in the employment marketplace. One of the biggest questions that you might have about search firms is a simple one. Why do companies hire them? To help answer this, I'd like to relay my own personal experience. The first time that I learned about executive search and recruiting was when I was in college attending Oklahoma State University and working for the school newspaper. The editor of our newspaper sent me out to cover a story because OSU was hiring a new president for the school, and the school hired a search firm to find that president. And I thought it was very intriguing, and I wondered, why can't OSU find their own president, and why does the school need to hire another company to find the president for them? So the editor sent me to interview the dean who was in charge of the search committee and to ask him some questions to learn about the search process so that I could report in the paper. And what I learned that day fascinated me and planted the seed in my mind about the search profession, which would later be my career. So my experience in college helps to illustrate why companies or universities hire recruiters, and there are two main reasons for this. The first reason is talent. Companies want the best and the most qualified candidates to work for them. But unless those candidates are unhappy with their current employer, they may not even be looking for a new position. In fact, most of the time, these candidates are rather content where they're working right now. They're probably paid well, they're kept busy, and they're overall happy. However, that does not mean that these individuals would not be open to considering another position. Like most people, they want greater opportunities and advancement. Companies find it difficult to identify and successfully recruit these individuals. It's not easy, and it can be labor-intensive, especially if you don't have the expertise or experience. And that's why companies hire search firms to find and recruit the best candidates away from their current employment situation. The second reason is confidentiality. From a company's perspective, there's only one thing that's better than hiring the best candidates in the marketplace, and that's hiring the best candidates when nobody knows that they're doing it. And specifically, they don't want their competition to know what they're doing. And there's a major reason for this because the candidate or candidates that they're attempting to hire could be working for one or more of their competitors. This can also be the case when a company is trying to expand into a new area or if they are replacing an underperformer. They usually do not want to let that underperformer go until they have found a suitable replacement. In fact, I have a situation like that I'm working on right now. One of my clients has hired me to confidentially find a replacement for one of their executive level employees who is underperforming. It's a confidential search, so I'm not able to post the position anywhere online, and I'm reaching out to people confidentially under the radar to fill a position that the company is not advertising online in any way. And so that is where search consultants enter the picture. They have more access to the top candidates in the marketplace, and they also have the time, energy, resources, and know-how to conduct the search in a confidential way. As another example, I was working for an organization in the consumer packaged goods arena, and they wanted to hire a sales force for their veterinary channel that they were just starting. So they hired our firm to help build their sales team under the radar, and they didn't want their competition to know what they were doing before they had their new sales force hired and trained. And that's because they wanted to launch their sales team and take the competition by surprise. So now that we've discussed why companies use search consultants, let's now address the reasons why you as a career professional need to get on search consultants' radar. To help address this question, let's look briefly at the history of the search profession. It dates back to the post-World War II era. It was during this time that America had returned to prosperity, and that resulted in a tight labor market. That led to the need for companies to hire a third party to scour the landscape for talent at competing companies. This means that search consultants have become the gatekeepers for some of the nation's top jobs. When a company wants to fill an important, especially a higher level position, they call upon the services of a search consultant. And once again, some statistics show that more than 60% of executive level positions are filled through search consultants. But it's not just the executive level positions where companies hire search consultants. They hire them for many different levels of positions, including middle management roles and individual contributor positions. So for you to know about some of these very best jobs in the industry, it's important to have relationships with good search consultants who know your industry niche. But to take it a step beyond that, your relationship with the search consultant can be one of the most important relationships that you will have as you navigate your career. And it's especially important as you move into increasing roles and increasing levels of responsibility. So in other words, the higher you climb, the more important it will be. So when should you establish a relationship with a recruiter? The short answer to this is long before you need one. You might think that you don't even need to talk with a recruiter because you have a good job right now. But as we discussed earlier, job security is a myth. And not only that, but what if you are not completely satisfied with your current position? Would you not be interested in hearing about new employment opportunities from time to time? What I have learned over the years is every person basically falls into two categories. Either you're going to retire with your current organization, or you're going to eventually make a move and take another position, and that could be either voluntary or involuntary. So which of these two categories do you fall into at the moment? Here are two really good reasons why you should build a relationship with a search consultant right now. Number one, they have more contacts with hiring managers than you do. In fact, they have worked with some of these hiring managers for years and already have working relationships with them. And two, as we have discussed, the most attractive jobs are not always posted online or anywhere else. And the only way to find out about them and apply for them is through a search consultant. So that brings up another question. How do you get on a search consultant's radar and get noticed? There are two main ways. The first way is to be known in your field. And there are some different ways that you can do this.
Thank you.
And they include joining industry associations, writing articles for trade journals, participating in social networking sites, especially LinkedIn. And if you are not on LinkedIn, I would highly recommend that you join it. If you're a well-known entity, search consultants will seek you out. And secondly, seek out a search consultant. You'll want to find an experienced search consultant with a proven track record of success in your industry niche. And you can ask your colleagues and friends to provide referrals of search firms that they've worked with in the past. But the key is to be proactive. And remember, don't wait until you need a search consultant before you reach out to one and build a relationship. So right now I'd like to reference another book, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, by best-selling author Harvey Mackay. This is another book that every professional needs to read. By most estimates, you can only live 3 days without water. So in a literal sense, you have to dig your well before you're thirsty or you run the risk of death. In the figurative sense, when you are unemployed, you need a job right now. However, just like digging a well, it takes time to find another opportunity. And a job is not necessarily going to fall into your lap just because you're suddenly unemployed. Look at it this way. A recruiter can help you to dig your well. The worst time to look for a job is when you find yourself unemployed. And the best time to look for other opportunities is when you already have a job and you can strategically advance your career forward. You have more leverage in that situation. So don't wait to find a search consultant. Build relationships with them now and dig your well before you're thirsty. So once you get on a search consultant's radar and they know that you exist and you're attempting to build a relationship with them, then what is next? And I'm going to present two lists now. One is a list of things that you should do when working with a search consultant, and the other is a list of things that you should not do.
Stacy, can I interrupt for just
So first of all, there are 8 things that you should do when working with a search consultant. Number 1, you'll want to treat them just like you would treat a hiring authority. Search consultants are your doorway to a better opportunity, just like a hiring authority would be. Your positive interaction with a search professional is one of the most intelligent strategies in today's competitive marketplace. As a result, every call and interaction should be positive in nature, and that means being prompt, being open, being honest and transparent about your career goals, and doing what you say you're going to do. I sent out the same message to 2 individuals asking them if they knew somebody who might be a good fit for a particular position. And I'll remember both of their responses, but for different reasons. And as I read them, think about which person I would be more likely to help in the future. So the first message I got back when I sent out a question about, do you know somebody for this job opportunity? So this one individual, he responded and he said, wow, so you were sending me an email to ask if I know somebody who could fill this position. Has it ever crossed your mind that I might be qualified for this position? I recommend that you review your whole paradigm of mass email phishing expedition. So the second person, their response was much different. She said, Stacy, sorry, I am not on LinkedIn as much, so I hope you get this reply. I am not movable, but if it's the place that you've referenced, it's one of my former places of employment and a great group of people. She said, I am happy to recommend you to one of our great young pathologists who remains interested in pursuing academic opportunities and would be interested in relocating. So as you probably guessed, I will remember the second response in a more positive fashion. And when this person needs my help in the future, I will remember her willingness to help me and the great attitude that she had. So the second point is to send your resume. A search consultant is not going to remember much about your skills and accomplishments without having your resume on file. And that's why it's important that you invest your time and energy into creating a professional resume. Before I talk about how to construct your resume the right way, I want to address what your resume is not. Your LinkedIn profile is not your resume. And I know that some people think that their resume and their LinkedIn profile are the same, but that's because as a recruiter, I have asked people to send their resumes to me and they'll respond with, see my LinkedIn profile. When a hiring manager or a recruiter asks for your resume, you should send your actual resume to them as an attachment in an email. But I do, however, also recommend updating your LinkedIn profile at the same time that you update your resume and keep them both consistent. The LinkedIn has definitely not replaced the resume in terms of its importance. And people who try to use their LinkedIn profile in place of their resume are creating roadblocks for themselves in the process. Here are some tips for constructing your resume the right way. You'll want to make sure that it contains your name, your contact information, and your address, but you don't necessarily need your street address, but you should at least provide a city and state. And the city and state is needed in case relocation is an issue. And I know in our search firm right now, we are getting so many resumes with no physical address and not even a city or state. And I am more likely to call somebody if they have their location on their resume, because if the position involves relocation or not, I at least know where they're located, and it saves me time in having to pick up the phone and call and ask where they live. You also want to include your email address, as email correspondence is very common during the hiring process. But I don't recommend including a mission statement or an objective statement. Instead, you'll want to use an executive or a professional summary. And the reason why is because if you state your mission or objective, it may not line up perfectly with the organization's mission and current opening. But if you list an executive summary, it might more closely align with the company's expectations. And when listing your work history, list it in reverse chronological order and make the work history as relevant as you can to your job search. And I also recommend tailoring the resume for the specific job for which you are applying. And don't use any unusual formatting or put your photo on the resume, because the resumes are going into an applicant tracking system, and if your resume is strangely formatted, it may not be imported properly, and then it would be almost as if you never applied for the position in the first place. I recommend presenting a Word document for your resume and not a PDF. And the reason is that there are so many different types of PDFs that there can be formatting problems, and some applicant tracking systems may have problems importing some versions of PDFs. The maximum length of your resume should be 2 pages, because most recruiters or hiring managers will only spend about 30 seconds looking at your resume. And if it's 3 or 4 pages, they'll lose interest quickly, or they may not even look at the 3rd or 4th page. I recently presented a webinar with Vicki Hitty of Resume Source titled Your Resume, Your Ticket to Landing Interviews. And a recording of that webinar is on the VetRecruiter's YouTube channel. And I encourage you to check it out for more information about the right way to construct your resume. If you just go to YouTube and the VetRecruiter in the search bar, you can access the channel and the recording. The third thing is to present yourself to recruiters in a credible manner. This is all about your personal branding, and that's because companies want to hire people who do 2 main things: exceed expectations and produce exceptional results. I have a recent example of somebody who did not present themselves in a credible manner to me. I reached out to somebody about an opportunity, and he said he would send his resume and call me at 5 o'clock in the evening. Well, 5 o'clock came and I had not received his resume and he hadn't called. And by 7 o'clock, he still had not called. So he said he was going to do two things by a certain time, send his resume and call, and he didn't do either one of those things. And as a result, he did lose some credibility with me because it's not a good way to start a relationship with a recruiter, and it's not a good relationship starter with a hiring manager or with anybody. A search consultant's reputation is ultimately on the line, so they only want to present candidates who are reliable and dependable. And if you present yourself this way to a search consultant as reliable and dependable, that will help convince them to present you to their client companies, which are the employers who could potentially hire you. The fourth thing to keep in mind when working with a search firm is to practice full disclosure. You need to be upfront about your current employment situation, and that means sharing any and all relevant facts, including your search efforts up to this point, your earnings history, and the real reason that you're looking for a new opportunity. And one thing not to do is to misrepresent yourself, such as saying that you're employed when you're not, because all that a search consultant has to do in that situation is make a couple of phone calls to find out if you're really employed with that company. And that did happen to me. I was talking with an individual, and he told me that he was employed by a certain company. The next call I received was from his employer, who said that they had recently gone through some layoffs, and the employer gave me a list of all the people who were laid off, and that person's name was on the list. It's better to be upfront and honest at the beginning of the process and be truthful, because a search consultant is going to be more interested in helping you if you're truthful. And being laid off is not something to be ashamed of, but what you don't want to do is represent yourself in the wrong way. So why must you provide all of the information that we just discussed? There are three main reasons. Number one, it helps the search consultant match appropriate job opportunities to your background and qualifications. And two, it helps the search consultant present your background accurately to the employer. And then number three, it helps avoid potential misunderstandings. The search consultant's goal is to arrive at a win-win situation for both the client and the candidate. And it's in their best interest to help negotiate a fair package for the candidate and the employer and to build a long-term relationship with both parties. This is especially true for search consultants who are in it for the long haul. For them, it's all about the relationships, and building authentic relationships is how they do that because they want repeat business. Number five, keep certain information confidential. While you should practice full disclosure, you should also keep some information confidential. And I'm talking about information related to your job search. Keeping your search confidential is ultimately in your own best interest. So you'll want to be careful about what information you share with your friends and colleagues. And one reason is that this is a very small industry, and you might be applying for a position, and your colleague or friend might also be applying for the same position. And you don't want to give somebody else an edge by tipping your hand. And you should keep everything open to the search consultant who is trying to help you, but be careful about what information you share with other people. If it's a confidential search, don't publicize it. Keep it to yourself because it will be better for you in the long run. So you can share the information with your spouse or significant other and the search consultant, but you don't want to share it to colleagues, friends, neighbors, etc. In addition, when you're working with a search consultant, they may also share very confidential information with you during the process. And you'll want to absolutely respect that confidentiality. You know, for example, with the current search that I am working on, it's a replacement for somebody. You know, it would be a dire situation if the candidates that I'm reaching out to, if it got back to the company that's conducting the search. Number six, add value beyond just being a good candidate. Companies want to hire candidates who can add value as employees, and they want search consultants who will add value by presenting these great candidates. And this is especially important to remember if you're not a viable candidate for an open position, either because you are not interested or because you're not qualified for the current role. If that's the case, strive to help the search consultant with the process because they'll remember you in a positive way in the future. And one way that you can do this is by giving them the name of somebody else who may be qualified for the position, because search consultants are more likely to call people who help them, And we saw a great example of that earlier in the presentation today when I reached out to a person about an opportunity, and that person helped me by providing the name of someone else that they thought would be a good candidate. And as I said, I will remember that person the next time I have an opportunity that would be a good fit for her. But I'm less likely to keep in mind the other candidate who presented a negative response. Number 7, you'll always want to be truthful. And that might seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised at how many candidates fail to tell the truth or overstate their qualifications during a hiring process. And we just talked about an example of someone who pretended to be employed but they were not. So it's important to be honest and transparent about everything, including your work history, qualifications, and accomplishments, because not providing relevant information can be just as bad as providing false information. And sometimes search consultants do conduct reference checks on candidates to verify what they're saying is accurate. So if they're not being accurate or they're withholding information or stretching the truth, it's very likely to be exposed, and then their candidacy could be in jeopardy. In fact, the search consultant will probably not want to represent them in the future and will feel like the candidate wasted their time. Number 8, it's important to follow through on your promises. Start with the fact that the quickest way to build trust with someone is to do what you say you're going to do, because that brands you as dependable and reliable. And keep in mind that you're competing against other candidates in the marketplace. And if you don't follow through, it will reflect poorly upon you. And time is of the essence. We just talked about the candidate who said he was going to send his resume and call by 5 o'clock, and he did not do either. But he should have at least had the professional courtesy to follow up instead of making promises he couldn't keep. Remember, it's a small industry, and in every interaction, you are branding yourself. A company wants to fill their positions very quickly with the best candidates in the marketplace. So make yourself available. If you say that you can make a phone call or a meeting, make sure that you follow through and you show up. If you promise it, be sure to do it. Now let's move on to our next list. There are 7 things that you should not do when working with a search consultant. And number 1, do not pay a search consultant to find you a position. There are 2 types of recruiting firms. One that gets paid by the candidate and one that's paid by the employer. The more reputable search firms are the ones who are paid by the employer, and there are plenty of those operating in every industry. These search consultants are paid by the employer for helping that company fill their open position with the best candidate possible. They do not get paid by the candidate or ask the candidate for money. And search consultants cannot take money from both parties. So if a search consultant says that they're charging candidates for helping them find a position, I would recommend finding another search consultant. The second thing to keep in mind is don't always expect to know how a search professional got your name. Search consultants deal in confidentiality. That's part of the value that they provide to everyone that they work with. If you did not contact the search consultant yourself, how they got your name is not what is most important. You should actually consider it a compliment because somebody provided your name as a reference. What is important is that the search consultant has what is potentially a better opportunity for you, and they wouldn't be talking with you if they didn't. Now, that doesn't mean that it's an ideal position for you. However, you should at least be open to listening and hearing about opportunities because it doesn't cost you anything to listen, and it's always good to know what else is out there. And I have a story about this. I have a candidate who was working for a major competitor of one of my clients, and he was very happy in his position and wasn't looking, but I convinced him to talk with my client. It was a 6-month-long interview process that he ended up going through, and he received an offer and he accepted it. And with the raise in pay that he received for accepting my client's offer, he and his wife were able to pay off their debt, have a baby, save money for the baby's future, and buy a house. And he still thanks me to this day for convincing him to go through the process. He said that the decision had a tremendous impact on not just his professional life, but also his family's life. And he said he was very glad that he kept an open mind, and he would have missed out if he had not agreed to go on that interview. The third thing to keep in mind is don't accept an interview with a company unless you're truly interested in the opportunity. And you're not going to be interested in every position that a search consultant presents to you. It's just not possible. However, if you say that you are interested and you do want to interview, make sure it's because you really are interested in that opportunity. What you don't want to do is accept an interview to get a free trip to a city where your relatives live or take a free mini vacation. And I know that sounds strange or funny that I would even say that, but I have a couple of examples of that. And being in the search business for 20 years, I've seen thousands and thousands of situations. And so a couple of examples, we had a candidate of ours who was going in for an interview, and he decided to take his entire family to this city, and they stayed in a resort and they had meals. And so when the hiring manager got the invoice at the end of the interview process, he looked at the invoice and he was expecting to see just the candidate's expenses, but what he saw was the entire family's expenses, and he was intending to pay for one night of hotel. And the candidate billed him for multiple nights of hotel. We have another candidate who took an interview in New York City because his wife had never gone to New York City, and he wanted to take her there over the weekend. So he had gone on an interview and had decided he wasn't interested. He didn't tell me that, of course, and so the company flew him out for another interview on a Friday, and they put he and his wife up in a hotel over the weekend in New York and took him to a Broadway play and to a nice restaurant and just really rolled out the red carpet. And then when he got back home on a Monday, he lived in the Midwest. He told me he was never interested in taking that position, but it was a good opportunity for him to take his wife to New York. So I'm surprised he admitted that he did, and it's burned his bridges with me and also with the hiring company. So it's a rare thing. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So that's why I mentioned it. The fourth thing is, don't think you're a candidate for every position the search consultant has. And as I said earlier, it's not possible for you to be interested in every position that a search consultant is going to bring to your attention. And it's also not possible for you to be a viable candidate for every position that they're going to have. So you don't want to try to manipulate your background in an attempt to be a fit for every position. And search consultants do interview literally thousands of people every year. So they'll have a sense of whether or not a candidate is truly qualified. So just go for the things where you truly are qualified and truly interested. The fifth point is, don't circumvent the search consultant and call the potential employer yourself. When a search consultant reaches out to you about a new opportunity, you should work through the search consultant and not around them. And I know that some candidates will think, if only I could speak directly with the hiring manager, I could convince them of what a great candidate I am. And this happened with one of our candidates. Our candidate called the hiring manager of one of my clients on his cell phone after hours, and the hiring manager was not happy. In fact, he called me and said they weren't going to consider the person anymore. And there was another incident a few weeks ago. I was working on a confidential search for one of my clients, and I was speaking with an individual who had formerly worked at the organization, who said that she was interested in the position. I told her it was a confidential search and that she needed to work through me and not contact the company herself directly, even though she previously worked there. But she didn't listen, and she did contact the hiring manager directly. So then he called me and said that they weren't going to consider her any longer because he knew that I had asked her not to do that and that she wasn't supposed to do that. So remember that companies rely heavily upon the judgment of the search consultants that they hire. And when people try to go around a recruiter that the client trusts and contact the employer themselves, then they can often get disqualified or off the list to consider for future opportunities. The next slide makes me laugh, but don't be a stalker candidate. Showing persistence can be a good thing, and persistence is often needed during a job search, but there's a fine line between persistence and annoyance. If a search consultant does not return your calls immediately, then it means that your qualifications are probably not suited for the firm's current searches. And it might take some time for someone to get back with you because their immediate priority is to fill the client's current openings. The seventh thing is, if you don't get the position, don't write the search consultant a negative note. You just be grateful for the opportunity to have participated and competed in the interview process. And oftentimes only one candidate gets selected, and there might have been multiple highly qualified individuals, and the search consultant would love to place everybody, but that's just not possible. So if you don't get the position, I know it can be hurtful or disappointing, and those are natural emotions that result from the fear or the feeling of being rejected. But remember, like I said, only one candidate can be hired. So if you don't get hired, it's not the search consultant's fault. And the search consultant has very little control, if any control at all, over the person that the company ultimately hires. And sometimes they don't have a whole lot of influence either. They're just taking people through the company's normal interview process. And the company is the one that ultimately decides which candidate will receive an offer of employment. So don't take it out on the search consultant by sending them a negative note. The best thing is to thank them for the process and ask for feedback and ask to be kept in mind for future opportunities. I recently had a candidate send me a note to tell me that my hiring manager was stupid for not hiring them, and there's no good that can come from a letter like that. So when it comes to search consultants, don't forget that they could deliver your next position to you, later that might be an ideal situation. So don't burn bridges right now. And then as I wrap up today's presentation, I'd like to mention a passage from the book, The Recruiter is Your Friend, This Ain't Your Granddaddy's Job Search by Kristen Hallows. Unlike a military raid, recruiters do not take hostages. They simply offer better opportunities for potential candidates to consider. Employees are not owned. They choose what is best for them and their families. If they opt to take advantage of a new opportunity, the shame should not be on the recruiter, but rather on the former employer for taking them for granted and not ensuring that the best opportunity was being delivered. So companies have accused recruiters for years that they steal their employees, but nobody puts employees in a bag and then carries them out across the street. People leave their positions because they want to leave, not because they're being forced to leave. Now, we've all heard this saying that it's not what you know, but it's who you know. And successfully making a transition and growing your career is all about networking. And you should have a recruiter in your network. If you don't have a good recruiter in your network, then you should have a plan for finding one and building a relationship with them. And keep in mind that working with a search consultant is all about timing. They may not have the ideal opportunity for you today or even in 6 months from now, but in 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, they may have an ideal situation for you. So it's about building a long-term relationship. So do find a search firm that has experience in your industry. If you are a veterinarian, you'll want to work with a firm that places veterinarians and not a firm that places accountants and marketers. If you're in the animal health industry, you'll want to work with somebody who understands the industry and not somebody that's working in the grocery industry, for example. And as we discussed at the beginning of today's webinar, the current business environment involves a whole lot of uncertainty. And one of the best ways to deal with the uncertainty in a positive way is to make connections with recruiters. And I hope that today's webinar has helped to eliminate some of the confusion that you might have when it comes to working with search consultants. And that's because I truly believe that having relationships with good recruiters is some of the most important relationships that you can have throughout your career. So if you have any questions about today's webinar or how you can take the next step in your career, here is my contact information. Also, we have a newsletter that we send out every month that has career tips and hot job opportunities, and you can sign up for those on our website, and I've listed the website. So thank you for joining me on this webinar, and I think that we're going to open up the floor now for some Q&A.
So if you have questions, we would encourage you, if you're logged in online, to go ahead and type those in the chat screen at the bottom of the page. And if you are logged in by teleconference, first of all, I want to make sure that you mute the audio on your phone, but you can also tweet us at #MABwebinar. And we'll leave the questions open as long as they're coming in. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. So for those online or on audio who can't hear by the teleconference, the question on the floor right now is, would you recommend using multiple recruiters? Stacy.
So, you ask different recruiters that question, you'll probably get different answers. It really depends on how hard you want each of those individual recruiters to work on your behalf or represent you, because recruiters, if they know that you're working with them on an exclusive basis, they're going to work very hard to find you opportunities. If they know that you're working with multiple recruiters, they may be less inclined to market you, just to spend the time investing in marketing you to other companies. So what I would do is I would recommend asking each of the individual recruiters that you're reaching out to what they would recommend on that, because if you ask multiple recruiters, you'll get different answers. I know that it's my preference when I work with somebody that that they work with me exclusively, but I also don't want to limit their opportunities by telling them that they can't work with other recruiting firms, because other recruiting firms may have different opportunities from the ones that I have. So I would just suggest talking to the individual recruiting firms that you're working with and get their opinion on that.
Great questions coming in right now. So second question, to start a relationship with a search consultant, do you send an unsolicited general resume or get in touch by telephone or email first? Stacy.
I would recommend sending a resume first and then giving them a chance to review and consider your qualifications, and give it a couple days, and then I would recommend giving them a call just to follow up on their resume. What I wouldn't recommend doing is keeping them on the phone for 30 minutes or an hour, just a brief conversation saying, I sent the resume a couple days ago, just wanted to follow up and make sure that you received it, and wanted to introduce myself to you, and if there's any additional information that you need, please reach out to me. That's how I recommend handling that.
And then what is your opinion of bringing a resume for the interview, and then during the interview, what length should that be? I always try to keep my interview resume to a single page. Any advice on that part?
I would recommend the resume being 2 pages. That's just sort of the standard that I recommend in general. I absolutely do recommend that you take your resume with you to the interview, and I would take a copy for each person who's going to be present at the interview. So if there's 5 people present, I'd probably take 6 copies of your resume, just to take an extra copy so that if somebody pops in the room that you're not expecting, then you can also hand them a copy of your resume. Because even if you sent the company electronic resume, sometimes the hiring managers that are there in the interview panel just don't take the time to print out the resume and take it to the conference room. So it's a nice professional gesture for you to take those resumes with you and give each person a copy of it.
Prior to the resume, or prior to the webinar, Stacy, we were visiting a little bit about who should be contacting a recruiter on your behalf and a search professional on your behalf, and who should be contacting companies on your behalf. I anticipate we'll have a wide range of folks who are watching the recording of this webinar. Could you touch on some of those things that we were visiting about at the outset?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because we were talking and I was mentioning that it didn't used to happen 20 years ago, but it happens now. I get more calls from people in their 20s from their parents, their mom or their dad, or sometimes even a significant other that will call me and say that they want to talk with me about their son or their daughter's job search, because their son is too busy to conduct his job search, so mom and dad are calling the search consultant to handle it for them. And I was telling Deborah that my philosophy on that is, if the person that's conducting the job search doesn't have time to talk with me, then I don't have time to help them with their job search, because it's so important for the search professional to have that established and build that relationship with the person, because they have to know who it is. I mean, they're putting themselves on the line out there. They're representing this person. They have to know who it is that they're representing, and if they don't have a relationship or haven't spoken with the person, they're not going to feel comfortable or confident in representing them to their clients, who are the employers. So it's not a good idea. I don't recommend for somebody's mom or dad to call the search consultant or call the employer, do the job search for them. The person that's looking for the position needs to conduct their own job search. Deborah, did I hit on, was there anything else on that we were talking about earlier that you wanted me to mention?
No, that was perfect. Thank you. Any additional questions? We'll be watching the Twitter feed for just a few more minutes, and there's definitely time to get your questions in. I guess I have one additional question, Stacy. If you are someone who is watching the recording of this or who's present today that may not work in an area that you are directly responsible for, how would one go about finding a recruiter in a different area of industry or education or whatever?
Okay, so if they're not in the animal health or the ag, probably the best thing to do is to ask people in your field that you're working in who they would recommend. There are thousands of search firms and recruiters out there, and some they're in it for the long haul. It's their career. Others are fly-by-night people, or they're people that might be working in a dozen different industries that may not really have the depth of the relationship. So you want to work with somebody. My recommendation is that you work with somebody that has a long tenure in the niche where you're looking for a position, and that you check around to people that you respect, your colleagues, your other people in the profession that you're in, and ask them who they would recommend. You could also reach out to the Top Echelon Network. The Top Echelon Network, they have 1,200 recruiting firms that are members. My firm is a member, so if I get a call from somebody and they say I need to find a search consultant that works in accounting finance, I can just tap in, I can call the Top Echelon or look on their website and find somebody that handles accounting and finance. Or if I need, someone's looking for a legal recruiter, I can tap into that Top Echelon Network and find out who the good legal recruiters are. So those are a couple of my recommendations. The other thing they could do too, they could send me an email and I could try to connect them with somebody, because I have a large network of recruiters that work in other niches.
Current question is, please give an example of a professional summary.
So the professional summary, so what I was saying before is, in the old days, people would put an objective statement. And, for example, I am looking for a position of a technical services veterinarian. Well, the company gets that resume and they go, well, I don't have an opening for a technical services veterinarian, but I do have this other position open for a veterinarian that entails, something different, whether it be pharmacovigilance or it's a liaison role working between sales and marketing. And so when you put an objective on there, it's so narrow that if it doesn't exactly 100% line up with what the company's hiring, some hiring managers may just think they're not interested. So a professional summary or an executive summary, it would be just a paragraph introducing yourself as a career professional. So it would just be a summary highlighting, I'm a marketing professional. And if anybody on this call wants an example, they could email me and I could email them an example of this. But it's basically just a summary, just capturing who you are as a professional in a paragraph at the top of your resume. It's talking about what you're offering to the company in terms of your qualifications. You're offering them something. You're not asking for something. So an objective statement, it's you're asking the company for this position. I'm applying for a tech services position. You're asking for a tech services role. On the summary, you're not asking, you're offering who you are as a professional and how you're going to benefit and add value to that employer. These are some great questions, by the way.
We'll do one more call for questions before we close the webinar. So if you have a question, now would be a great time to type it in. Seeing none, I want to thank you again for joining us today for this webinar. I hope that you are able to take advantage of some of the tips that Stacy offered today. We will be making a recording of the webinar available to everyone who logged in and then everyone who signed up. That turnaround should take about 48 hours, so hopefully by close of business tomorrow we should have something to you. If you have any questions regarding the Master of Agribusiness program, either our traditional cohort or our animal health cohort, I'd be happy to field those, and I do encourage you to reach out and connect with Stacy as well. Thank you, Stacy.
You're very welcome, Devorah. Thank you to Devorah and KSU for hosting this webinar today.